Welcome to Takeline. Quick note about today's recording. Renee Montgomery, you are coming to us from Atlanta, as you always do, but the weather in Atlanta is threatening, if not dangerous. What's going on?
The weather is wild here in Atlanta. We had a tornado warning.
Woof.
It's kind of crazy because I was on a staff meeting this morning, and all the staff just kind of jumped out of the call, like dropped from the call. And we were like, well, that's weird. And then they all were like, yeah, we're going to probably have to go down some floors because our office building is high. But there's a real tornado warning that happened here in Atlanta, just so people know. And it's kind of knocking out the Wi-Fis. It's making some people have to shelter in place. My best friend had to go in a closet. So it's like,
oh my God,
it was pretty bad weather here today in Atlanta.
Well, I'm glad you're safe, and I'm hoping that everybody else in the Atlanta area is safe. That is truly alarming.
Yeah, it's crazy because it's like, I don't know. I didn't really expect that here, but yeah, it happened. But I'm happy to be here, Jason.
Yes, we're doing it. Let's do
it. We in here.
Let's do it.
Okay, so after missing 20 games with a high right ankle sprain, LeBron James returned to the lineup over the weekend, and needless to say, the games didn't go necessarily how he had wanted them to go. They were underwhelming to a lot of people. But after the game on Sunday, LeBron had some pointed comments at the play-in tournament. He stated whoever came up with that basically needs to be fired. And when I'm saying basically, he literally said whoever came up with that needs to be fired. I don't know if this is just... You always have to take things players say with a grain of salt. Like I say that all the time. If somebody puts a mic in front of you after you just lost a competition and they want you to be graceful, that's always something that I think athletes do on a regular that doesn't get commended enough. However, sometimes after a loss, players say things. So, Jason, what do you think about that? Is this just him blowing off some steam after a rough couple of games? Like, what do you feel about that?
Well, first of all, let's explain that the play-in tournament is a wrinkle that the NBA added after it had been talked about for many years, but they added it last postseason in the bubble. And the way it used to work in the NBA was top 8 teams in both conferences, Eastern and Western, would just go on and play in the playoffs, right? The way it works in the play-in era is the 7th and 8th place teams play each other, and the 9th and 10th place teams play each other. The winner of the 9th and 10th place team bracket goes on to play the loser of the 7th and 8th place team bracket, and then the winner of the 7th and 8th place team bracket just goes on and becomes the 7th seed in the playoffs. So, in other words, we've added extra games. It's still the playoffs, but it's just conceptually something different, much like the wild card in NFL. You know, like, I get it. If I'm LeBron, I get it. First of all, as you mentioned, right after a loss, the Lakers have now dropped, I believe, 6 in a row. The defense is still there, and it was there when LeBron and AD were out. But obviously, AD and LeBron are the scoring engines for that team. That's where the points are going to come from, and that's any team with LeBron James is a team with finals aspirations, and coming off of the deep playoff run all the way to the NBA championship in the bubble, the short off season, and now the extremely dense current season that we are in, the prospect of playing more games to get into the playoffs when in the past you would have just been in as the 7th or 8th seed, I can understand why that is supremely annoying to LeBron James. That said, the whole reason for having the play-in was to generate interest in these late April, early May games coming down the stretch of the season when fans might tend to tune out. And I think the fact that you're getting these kind of like snippy comments from LeBron James as well as Mark Cuban, and we'll get into that in a second, mean that it's working as intended, right? People are caring about these games. LeBron James in particular is caring about this game. Like, this is a game that really mattered. And therefore it's working.
Yeah, and to that point, if you're an organization and the NBA is a business, I always have to say that because people need to realize sports is a business. If you're a business and you have one of your stars bringing more attention to the business, there's never a bad look for the NBA. Like, they want the discussions to happen. You know, I remember when All-Star happened, right? And the captains and choosing the captains and choosing the team. Oh, their panties were in a bunch all over the place. They thought that was the craziest thing. They didn't like it. The NBA didn't stop it because everyone thought it was crazy and they didn't like it. They kept on the course because it's generating more attention. It's generating more media. And we know, anybody that knows that works in the business, that's always a good thing. There's no such thing as bad press in a sense of if they're talking about you, that's a good thing. Now, having said that, as a player, I can see how that's very frustrating that if you make the top 8, like you're like, look, we got to be one of the top 8 teams at the end of the season. All we got to do as a player, what we talk about is all we got to do is get into the postseason, and that's a brand new season. When you start a brand new slate, it doesn't matter if we're the 8 team. It doesn't matter if we're the 7 team. Once we make the playoffs, you have a new season. And so now, conceptually, what players we talk to and tell ourselves, you're changing it. Because now you don't just have to make it to the 8 or 7 spot. You got to make it there, and then you got to win a game and to still stay there. So I think that's the problem. It's almost like, you know, we talked about the super leagues. We don't have that fall in accountability type of thing. And so we're not liking it, it's looking like.
Let me ask you a question. So J.A. Adonde, former ESPN personality, currently the director of sports journalism at the Medill Journalism School, tweeted earlier today, we're taping this on a Monday, if the play-in ends up costing the NBA, the Lakers and Celtics for the playoffs, you've got to figure there will be consequences, maybe not lost jobs, but that the format would change. Do you buy into this? Like, this is always a talking point as we enter the postseason. Is that, oh man, the Spurs? You know that the NBA doesn't want to see the Spurs in. I'm sure, like as a player coming from UConn, you must have gotten these same kind of like criticisms leveled at your teams. Oh, you know that the NCAA wants UConn and this to make a deep run. Like, it's so important to them. What do you make of this idea of the NBA paying that close attention to teams with regards to the amount of ratings that they would garner? Like, do you buy into this like conspiracy theory at all?
I don't necessarily so this is what I buy into. I buy into that the league probably had no idea that the Lakers or the Celtics would be a part of this play-in game. I think when they were thinking about the play-in game, they were thinking about teams like me and you, the Atlanta Hawks, the New York Knicks. Imagine them usually not being a playoff team. But now these are some big market teams that maybe now there's a way to get us in the playoffs. I think they were thinking of it from the other side of it. I think that most people going into this season where this was already in place, the play-in game, I think that if you had to ask before the season started, would the Lakers be playing in a play-in game? Would the Celtics be playing into a play-in game? I think that most people would be like, no, they're going to be a top seed.
Yep.
Now it's starting to get interesting because of that. Now, to answer your question, though, I do think the NBA has a wish list. Like, I don't necessarily know if they would try to go and conjure up how to get them there. But of course, the NBA wants their big market teams. I mean, they would love, it would be nothing better than the Lakers Celtics finals. You know, like, of course, that's going to generate interest. Now, do they go about trying to do things to make that happen? I really don't think so. I think that they're in the money making business. What more ways can they make money? What more ways can they bring excitement? Like I said, it's the same as the All-Star game. I think people thought they were starting to get a little boring. So what did they start to do? They wanted to switch it up. Let's have captains. I think this is a money-making idea in a sense of how can we switch things up to generate interest?
You know, I think that the Lakers and the Celtics should have just tried to win more games if they want to be in the playoffs. You know, have they thought about that?
So there's that.
Have they considered try to do that? Next topic. Packers quarterback Aaron Rodgers picked the perfect moment to sneak attack the NFL and the sporting world when he announced, or it was reported during last week's NFL draft, that he, after years of clashing with the Green Bay front office, wants out of Green Bay. Green Bay took an offensive lineman, Josh Myers, out of Ohio State in the second round. But of course, they took a quarterback in the previous year's draft. But is this a little too late? And how are we beginning to see with Tom Brady moving out of New England? Are we beginning to see the kind of hints of the kind of player empowerment movement that we have seen in the NBA now coming to the NFL?
It's interesting because in the NBA, like, people are moving around all the time. It's very common now. It's not even very rarely now from this point on are you going to see a player that probably plays for one organization their whole career. But when you look in the NFL, it's not so much movement because I don't think the players have as much celebrity in a sense of, a lot of basketball players' faces. Well, football players, you really just don't. Just the nature of the sport. They wear helmets. But for Aaron Rodgers to do this, I mean, I think everybody saw what Tom Brady did. A lot of people people were torn about the Tom Brady move. I don't know if everyone assumed that he would be able to win a championship right out the gates. But now, once it's happened, once you've seen a player that's a little bit up there in age, he's an older player. It's no question. Tom Brady's older. And now you saw him move to a new team, find a way to be successful. Well, now Aaron Rodgers is like, hey, look, I can do what Tom Brady did. I don't have to stay here and just finish out my career because I'm old. I think players taking back that power, that's new. That's 2020 type of new. And I will almost pose the question to you. Is there a right way to seek change of scenery? Because I remember when James Harden did it in the NBA, that didn't go over well. But then I remember when other players have done it, and it has not been as big of a deal. Every time LeBron James moves, it's a big deal. But there's some players that have demanded a trade, and, like Kyrie Irving, he's moved around, and people don't really mind, and he's a superstar. So is there a right way, Jason, or is what is that?
It's interesting because I feel like this is the kind of conversation a player taking agency in their own career outside maybe of the window afforded to them by their contract that is inevitably just tilted against the player. On the one hand, you have the fans of a particular team that are just going to be hit in an emotional way about a star player wanting out, right? That's just going to affect them differently. Even if there is some blame to go around with a GM or a front office, the star is the star. The star is the person in the spotlight, and that's just the person that is inevitably going to garner most of the heat, most of the press, and most of the criticism. I think that it's just kind of like a no-win. Now, I do think that time kind of heals all wounds, and then especially when players move on, like Kevin Durant, who moved on from Oklahoma City and then went to Golden State and is now in Brooklyn. I think if you win, some of that criticism is blunted. Yep. There is still that, you joined a super team kind of way to like discredit the accomplishments. But I do think the criticisms are then blunted. But in any kind of situation like this, the everyday fan, I think, we are just kind of programmed over years and decades, an entire lifetime of watching sports, to side with teams over players. I don't know that that's necessarily fair, but it just feels like it's that way. I do notice too, there's like a real difference in the way these players are perceived. Like LeBron James, they burned his jersey. It was his fault. He was disloyal, but when it's Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, first of all, didn't get that kind of criticism. One, it's at least not outside of Massachusetts. And then if it's like a white player, then it's like the Yoko Ono story. Like, how did Shailene Woodley, how is she influencing Aaron Rodgers and causing him to leave his team? It's always like that. All of which is to say, we always blame the player, right? It's always the player's fault. There's no way for a player to want out that's going to insulate them from this kind of thing.
So having said that, when you get to a player, and a player knows that in the back of their mind, like even when I was a player, that people aren't going to perceive you basically outright asking to leave, then when we look at the Damian Lillard situation, does it make sense? Like, you know what I mean? Like if a player knows that if I come out right and say, and I'm not saying that Damian Lillard told Chris Haynes anything, I'm just saying, but knowing what we know about how fans perceive players, like what do we feel about the Damian Lillard situation now is what I'm saying.
That's a great one. So Chris Haynes last week at Yahoo, Chris Haynes, a great reporter, NBA reporter for Yahoo, who has historically throughout the course of his career had really good connections to Damian Lillard as a source of stories and just seems to always understand what Dame is thinking and what his intentions are. He wrote a story last week basically saying that Dame is unhappy. Part of the story says, quote, "From the oppressive collection of corporate partners to the national TV spots to repping the Trailblazers like no other to the arduous task of trying to recruit high-level talent to the Pacific Northwest. Damian Lillard has displayed an unprecedented loyalty to the franchise. It goes on to say that he's the greatest player in Blazers history. I'm not actually sure about that, but we'll table that for now. He has never issued an ultimatum to the management and approached most superstars venture down when they feel the roster hasn't been up to par for years." Lillard recently said that he had no role in the writing of this column, which is, again, not a thing that anyone said. I think it's very interesting, right? Because to me, there's a real value as a Knicks fan, right? As a Knicks fan who's watched my team be bad for 20 years, there's a real value to just kind of always being in the mix. Like, the thing I love about Damian Lillard, aside from his loyalty, is he has the Blazers just always in the mix. Yes, there are a few down years, but they're always like in the playoffs, and they're always a very dangerous team to play. And that in and of itself, as a person who is starved for playoff content from the team that I follow, I think there's a value to that. That being said, this is the way we talked about, is there a right way and a wrong way for a player to ask out? I think that this is part of it. The teams and team executives, they have an entire marketing department. They have an entire social media department. They can issue official proclamations. A player often doesn't have that. Exactly. And I think that if this is the way that that a player feels that they need to broadcast that, hey, pick it up, I don't have a problem with it. This is kind of the way the world works. Like, coaches, execs, team owners, they take shots at players all the time, and they do it out in the open. If this is the way that Dame Lillard felt that he needed to move the needle.
Jason, you are preaching to my heart right now. Yes, I agree. And
this is
that's
part of the game. This is just part of it.
The game. And you know what has really changed the game? Social media. Yep. Because now a player actually has somewhere where they can actually release a response. I mean, JJ Watt, let's use him for example. Yeah. He released where he was going. He released why he wanted to leave. Yep. He asked the team, here, allow me to do this to the fans, to tell the fans from my perspective where I'm going, what I want to do, why I'm leaving. He did that all from his social media. That's your new platform. That's your new media, but that's new. Because before, that wasn't a thing. Fans would only hear one side of every story. A player's a problem in the locker room. Why? Is there something going on in the locker room with the coach and the player? But we don't hear about that. All we hear about is a player's a problem. And so I think that when you look at if a player does want to leave, I remember people were trying to say Bradley Beal earlier in this season. They were like, get Bradley Beal out of DC. He never said anything ever. He never said anything ever, but it was the fan base that was basically trying to save him. But to that point, how does a player save himself without now not being called loyal or, now not having the fans burn up all my jerseys because I want to leave? There really was no out for players. So, Damian Lillard, to that point, he said, he wasn't irritated that Chris Haynes wrote it. He's a writer. That's what writers do. He's like, but I do know because of our relationship that people might assume that I was tied to the story, so that's the only thing that bothered me about it. But I'm just saying, hypothetically, if he liked he never said he didn't like what the story said. He never said
that he didn't like it, and he never said that what Chris Haynes wrote was not in line with what he was thinking and feeling. Okay. Never said that.
Okay. He basically said, look, I didn't tell Chris to write it, but maybe y'all should read what Chris is writing and talking about because we do got a little bit of issues over here. That's all I'm saying. So I think this is best case scenario for Damian Lillard.
Agreed.
If Chris wrote an article that said all of his feelings and he doesn't have to be tied to it, amazing. That's amazing.
I could not agree more. Listen, loyalty is a word in sports that was created to get players to take less money than they are worth.
Hello, somebody. Woo! You better. Let me snap for that because I'm trying to tell you, if people don't know, because the only people that have to be loyal in sports are athletes. Teams have never been asked to be loyal.
No,
coaches
coaches
have never been asked to be loyal. It's only players that are asked to be loyal. So you're asking players to be loyal to someone that doesn't have to be loyal to them. It's very difficult in that aspect. So, like I said, that could be best case scenario for Damian Lillard. He's like, look, I'm not irritated. I'm not attached to it. I'm not irritated. But hey, there's an article there. All right, so undefeated champ Floyd Mayweather is scheduled to fight notable YouTuber Logan Paul in a June 6th exhibition in Miami. What is happening?
I don't understand it.
The fight was originally scheduled for February 20th and includes a possible, listen to this, $100 million payout for Floyd Mayweather. So in case anybody was wondering, why in the world would Floyd Mayweather, the undefeated, undisputed champ of the world, be fighting a YouTuber? Well, yeah, $100 million might change anyone's minds. And so I'm just like, how do we feel about these, Jasons? Are these exhibition fights a good or bad thing for boxing? Like, I like these, like, I call them celebrity death matches at this point.
Yeah.
If you remember Nate Robinson with Logan Paul's brother, Jake Paul, but
I hope that I hope that Nate is okay, by the way, because he got put down in a way that was actually like scary. Like he got knocked out in a concerning way.
Very much so. So are these celebrity death matches, are they good or bad for boxing? Because like, I feel bad. I'm torn.
I know.
Like, I know that as a boxer that has been fighting your whole life, you pray for an opportunity like this. You put in the time, the blood, sweat, and the tears to fight Floyd Mayweather, and then you see a YouTuber rocking up and fighting him. So I know that that's not good. And then I also know that I'm the terrible consumer that I'm going to watch it. I hate to say it out loud, but I'm probably going to watch it. I don't know what to say. So I'm torn. I'm shamed with my own self, but I watch them.
Yeah, I think that, first of all, I'm sure like boxing purists, like Max Kellerman type people, have very serious feelings and arguments about this particular topic. To me, it's like bad for boxing. Boxing, like, historically has been one of the most corrupt sports that there is. Fight fixing, paying off of judges, people taking dives. That's not just stuff in the movies. That's stuff that's like has actually happened throughout the course of boxing's history. You know, and I think that obviously boxing was for a time one of the major sports in America, one of the major sports in this country, along with like horse racing and baseball for like a good 6 decades. Those were like the big sports in this country. I just think that we're in a place right now with boxing where it's almost in its most purest form, which is it is a spectacle based on an audience's interest in watching two people beat each other up who we really want to see get beaten up. And I think that this is a perfect example of that. Like, there's a lot of people out there who want to see Logan Paul get beat up. Similarly, there are a lot of people out there, though I don't expect it to happen at all, who would love to see Floyd Mayweather get touched up. I think, I think I expect Floyd Mayweather to toy with Logan Paul for like 2 rounds and then just kind of like slowly close the boom on him. But I think this is just like boxing in its purest form. It's like schoolyard stuff. We want to see two people who don't like each other, who we don't like, fight. Just like we did, like when we were back in elementary school. Like that's what it is.
It makes sense because you look at it. Some of the bad guys, like look at a Conor McGregor. We know that he's not even just a villain in the octagon, but we also know that he actually gets in trouble off the court. But that made his stock rise. He started getting bigger fights, bigger paydays because
we want to see him get his face pushed in.
And the same thing is happening for Jake Paul. Everybody is so mad that Jake Paul are getting these fight options and these big paydays. But like I said, that's why I said I'm part of the problem. I will admit it out loud because I'm watching to see exactly what you're talking about. Like, there's no way Logan Paul can beat Floyd, so I got to turn it on. But it's almost feeding into what is the issue in a sense.
I think part of it too is, following sports is it's a lot of work, knowing the amount that about the W and about NBA basketball, about basketball in general. That's watching games all the time. That's doing, like the same thing with people who follow baseball very closely, with the NFL very closely. The draft had, multiple rounds with dozens and dozens and dozens of players that people had to know about passing through the stage. With something like this, I'm not studying this. I just Logan Paul is fighting Floyd Mayweather on Saturday night. Yeah, sure, why not? I don't need to know anything. I don't need to research this at all. I just know.
It's entertainment. I almost look at it as entertainment rather than a sport. It's not even it is a sport. So hear me out. But when you talk about sports, you usually talk about rankings, their stats.
Right.
These fights don't include any of that. Yes, these fighters have their own stats, exactly, that they come in with. We know Floyd Mayweather, 50-0. We know his stats, but when it comes to this fight, none of those stats matter. This is basically like an entertainment. This is an event. Almost think concert style. And to that point, the fight is taking place in Florida. The promoters are able to sell tickets to a full crowd. That would be 65,000 people going to an event that might air on Showtime. So everything about this event, it's at the Hard Rock Stadium in Miami Gardens in Florida. 65,000 capacity availability. Going to air on Showtime. It's called a special exhibition, but I mean, this is just think concert. That's why I said this is an entertainment. This is
formerly in the past, if for a real, a sanctioned quote unquote boxing match, the weights would have to match. We'd care about reach. Logan Paul is 20 years younger than Floyd. He's 50 pounds heavier with a 6-inch reach advantage. Do we care about any of this? No.
No
do
one
we care
does.
if Logan makes weight or if Floyd bulks up to? No. That's people just want to see.
There's
them
no
fight.
rules.
And this is, I think that, as sad as it might be to real boxing aficionados and people who really care about the sweet science, as it's so called, I think this is kind of the future of what this sport is. This is kind of the future of boxing, is these stunt fights.
100%. And then you look at the, again, entertainment aspect. So Logan Paul, his brother, Jake Paul, has been in 3 fights. He's had 3 knockouts. We talked about Nate Robinson, Ben Askren. And the reason I say that is because they're putting on a show. And as long as there is a show to be put on, they're going to keep doing it. They have Snoop Dogg as the announcer for these. So I'm talking about, when I talk about putting on a show, they had in the past ones with his brother, Jake Paul, they had performances by famous rappers. It was an A-lister, star-studded event. So when you look at it as in, this is not a sporting event, this is an entertainment event, well, then it makes a lot of sense. I mean, they're getting millions of dollars in these fights, as much as you would for any other big time pay-per-view special. So, I mean, I don't see it stopping anytime soon. How could they stop?
I don't either. And here's the other thing about the appeal is, if you like either one of these people, great, you'll tune in. If you hate either one of these people, guess what? You'll tune in, because it's a perfect hate watch. It's amazing. I really do think that this is maybe the direction that boxing is heading in. Finally, we have to check in on the fallout from the European Super League. It continues, Renee. It continues. So over the weekend, Manchester United and Liverpool, 2 teams that were supposed to be in the European Super League, were scheduled to play a match Sunday at Old Trafford, Manchester United's ground. There was a crowd of reportedly about 1,000 fans that protested outside the arena. It turned aggressive, violent even, scenes. This is hyperbolic, but kind of reminiscent of the Capitol, with fans fighting through lines of police officers who were beating them back with truncheons and stuff. One officer required emergency hospital treatment after sustaining a significant slash to the face when they threw a bottle at him. The fans then managed to breach Old Trafford and were dancing around on the grounds. They had flares, they had signs wanting the Glazers out. And this protest was from a real hardcore section of Manchester United fans who just want the Glazers, who the Glazer brothers are the owners of Manchester United. They are also the owners of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Glazers bought Manchester United back in 2005 using basically credit. Like they didn't have the money, they borrowed the money, and since that time, Manchester United's finances have been significantly hindered because they've been having to pay the debt down. So they basically they bought something and then funneled the profits off of that team into the debt, and the fans absolutely hate it. So this is part of the fallout from the European Super League, and also the fact that American owners and the influence of American owners are so front and center to the conversations around the Super League. So you're seeing fans just act in a way that we're kind of not used to here in America.
Right.
It is wild scenes. Like, imagine here if fans of the Denver Broncos or something, or the Jets. The Jets are good because they've been historically like really struggling over the past couple of decades. Were so upset with the way the team was run that they broke into the stadium on game day, had flares and stuff, such that like the Jets would have to cancel the game. Really incredible scenes over in England right now.
And again, just a different type of fanship.
It's a different type.
Like, it's just a very different. I don't like that's the negative part, in a sense of like they will storm the building and get you out of there, and even if it's your team. But the cool part to me is, imagine being that passionate about your sports team. The reason I say that is because, like, we saw with LeBron when he was playing with the Cavs, his fan base was there at the Cavs, and when he went to Miami, they went to Miami. When he went back to Cleveland, they went back to Cleveland, and now his fans are over there in LA, because that's kind of how things work here. We're almost more a fan of players in America than we are of necessarily sports teams. Like, people will easily switch their whoever they're a fan of.
Yes.
But when you look at these teams overseas, you
Not
might
the
be
same.
born into what team you will cheer for
yeah.
the rest of your life. Like, if your dad or your family is a fan of Manchester, you're a fan of Manchester because you grew up in that
Absolutely.
household, and it's that serious. So it's just way different to see over there. And like I said, I played overseas for 10 years, so I've seen it at the basketball level. It's like that, but there is nothing like soccer or football over there. Like, that is just different.
It's just way different. In Scotland's top flight of football, the big rivalry there is between Rangers and Celtic, and over the years, that rivalry has become a stand-in for tensions between Protestants and Catholics. The Protestants support Rangers, the Catholics support Celtic. So you can imagine like the kind of battles that happen on the game day there,
Right.
and the kind of banter that goes back and forth. It's just like a different level of engagement with sports over there. Like, we think that we're intense. There is a different level of intensity that
They
taps
will
into,
die
like,
about their sports teams over
They
there. Like,
really
they
will.
are about that life.
Renee, I hope you're safe, and I hope everybody else in the Atlanta area is staying safe right now due to the inclement weather. But that's enough for us today. Please follow and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. That's right. And don't forget to subscribe to Takeline Show on YouTube for exclusive video clips from this episode and every episode, plus my digital series, All Caps NBA, which airs every Friday. Check it out. Goodbye.
Later. Let's go.